The word you use every time you order a drink, alcohol, is Arabic. It was named by a Muslim scholar in 9th century Baghdad who was forbidden from drinking it. He called it alcohol, the same word used for the ultrafine powder women applied to their eyes. He meant it as a compliment, the purest thing he knew. That is not trivia. That is a clue about how completely this substance has moved through human history, not as something we built or chose, but as something that has been quietly shaping us, our brains, our cities, our words, from long before we had the capacity to understand what it was doing. The story starts not with a bar or a brewery, but with a single mutation. About 10 million years ago, a common ancestor of humans, chimpanzees, and gorillas changed one digestive enzyme, alcohol dehydrogenase class 4, or ADH4. A single amino acid was shifted at position 294. Alanine became valine. That one swap made the enzyme 40 times more efficient at breaking down ethanol. Researchers at the Foundation for Applied Molecular Evolution reconstructed this from the DNA of 28 primate species, working backward through 70 million years of evolution to pinpoint the exact moment the change appeared. The study was published in the Proceedings of the National Academy of Sciences in 2014. What was happening on the ground at that time? The climate was cooling, forests were contracting, our ancestors were spending more time on the forest floor, where fallen, rotting fruit was common. Fermented fruit with alcohol in it. The primates who could process that food without getting sick had access to more calories. They survived better. They reproduced more. And so over millions of years, a digestive quirk became a defining feature of the human lineage. Your relationship with alcohol did not begin at a bar or a wedding or a bad week at work. It began on a jungle floor 10 million years before the concept of a drink even existed. You were not built to resist this thing. You were built, in part, because of it. And that is the bad news. Here is where it gets worse. In 2004, archaeochemist Patrick McGovern and his team at the University of Pennsylvania published an analysis of pottery shards from Jiahu, a Neolithic village in Henan Province, China. The shards dated to approximately 7,000 BCE. Chemical residue inside the clay rice, beeswax, hawthorn fruit, showed the molecular fingerprint of a fermented beverage. Not wine, not beer exactly. Something between a mixed ferment of grain, honey, and fruit that predates the oldest confirmed brewing evidence from the Middle East by more than 500 years. Jiahu is not famous for its alcohol. It is famous for something else. Archaeologists excavating the site also recovered what may be the earliest examples of Chinese pictographic writing, as well as bone flutes, some of the oldest playable musical instruments ever found anywhere on Earth. Fermentation, language, music, all from the same 55,000 square meter patch of ground. The evidence does not tell us that these things caused each other. But it does ask a question worth sitting with. What exactly were humans doing at Jiahu that required all three? The earliest record of humans brewing for a specific communal purpose comes from somewhere even older. Göbekli Tepe, in modern southeastern Turkey, is a ritual site built over 11,000 years ago. Massive carved pillars, some weighing 20 tons, are arranged in precise circular enclosures. The people who built it were hunter-gatherers. No cities, no agriculture, no supply chains. The question that has bothered archaeologists for decades is simple. How did they organize it? You need hundreds of people working in coordination for months to move stones that size. What was the incentive? In 2012, Martin Zarnkow of the Technical University of Munich analyzed residue from 6 large limestone basins found at the site, each capable of holding up to 160 liters. The chemical traces indicated calcium oxalate, a compound that forms during the soaking, mashing, and fermenting of grain. It is not conclusive. But the interpretation being taken seriously by researchers is that Göbekli Tepe hosted large-scale communal feasts, and that fermented beverages were part of what drew people there. The first monumental construction project in human history may have been funded not with money or coercion, but with the promise of something to drink together at the end of the day. This is the part most documentaries skip. Civilization did not spread because of agriculture. Agriculture may have spread because of fermentation. The two most widely cited theories for why humans first cultivated grain for bread and for beer have been debated since a 1953 paper titled, bluntly, "Did Man Once Live by Beer Alone?" The archaeological evidence from Göbekli Tepe does not settle the argument, but it suggests that the organized communal behavior required to build civilization was already present in humans before farming began, and that alcohol was one of the social technologies that made it possible, because alcohol does something very specific to the human brain. It suppresses activity at GABA A receptors, the main inhibitory system in the central nervous system. Fear drops, social distance compresses. Storytelling becomes easier. Trust becomes cheaper. A 2024 study in the journal Cell identified TMEM132B, a newly characterized protein that acts as an auxiliary subunit of the GABA A receptor and is directly responsible for alcohol's anxiolytic and sedative effects. That mechanism is ancient. It does not distinguish between a hunter-gatherer around a fire and someone at a company happy hour. The neurochemistry is the same. What changed is the dose. For most of human history, the dose was low. Reconstructed ancient Egyptian beer averages around 2 to 3% alcohol by volume. Pyramid laborers at Giza received a daily ration, estimated at several liters, enough calories to sustain hard physical labor, enough fermentation to make the liquid safer than the Nile water they would otherwise be drinking. Medieval workers drank something called small beer, often below 1% ABV, with breakfast. Children drank it, not to get drunk, because the fermentation process killed enough pathogens to make the liquid reliably survivable in a world without water treatment. Alcohol was not a vice, it was infrastructure. Then something shifted. And the shift did not come from Europe, or from the New World, or from any of the civilizations that history usually centers. It came from Baghdad. Muhammad ibn Zakaria al-Razi was a physician and alchemist working in the Islamic Golden Age, around 854 to 925 CE. He wrote the first dedicated medical text for children. He identified and described smallpox. He also wrote a book called The Secret, in which he described how to isolate pure ethanol from wine through distillation. He called it alcohol. The word eventually made its way into European languages, as the substance spread westward, first into Italy, where the school of Salerno documented distillation techniques in the 12th century, then north, then everywhere. By the time alcohol reached cultures with no prior history of it, it arrived already concentrated, already stripped of the slow, caloric, communal context in which it had been embedded for thousands of years. The Muslim scholars who invented the process were not allowed to drink what they made. That detail is worth holding. The people who created the most potent form of alcohol in history did so in a context of total abstinence. They were interested in chemistry, in medicine, in purity. They handed the technology to a world that had none of their restraint and very little understanding of what they had built. Rome is the most well-documented example of what happens when a civilization drinks without understanding what it is drinking. Roman wine was frequently sweetened with lead acetate called sapa, produced by reducing grape juice in lead vessels. The Romans knew it tasted sweet. They did not know it was neurotoxic. In January 2025, a study published in the Proceedings of the National Academy of Sciences analyzed lead isotopes preserved in Greenland ice cores and found that atmospheric lead pollution during the Pax Romana was high enough to cause an estimated 2.5 to 3-point drop in average IQ across the empire. The lead came primarily from silver smelting, but wine was an additional significant vector among the elite. Cognitive decline, infertility, erratic behavior in leadership, the historians are careful not to overstate causation. But the data now shows that the most powerful empire in the ancient world was operating under chronic, low-level poisoning, and that its leaders were drinking the poison voluntarily as a luxury. That is not a metaphor. That is a toxicology report on a dead civilization. Here is why it matters for you, specifically, right now. The ancient beer at Göbekli Tepe was around 2% ABV. The ration at Giza was designed for sustained physical labor, not rapid intoxication. Your brain was calibrated over millions of years to an ethanol environment that looked like fermented fruit and wheat grain beverages consumed alongside food during social activity for hours. The GABA A receptor system that evolved to handle that exposure does not reset to neutral cleanly when the dose is higher. Dopamine rises during drinking. The day after, baseline dopamine falls below where it started. That gap, the flatness of the morning after, is not weakness or failure. It is the rebound of a system designed for a much lower input, suddenly asked to process a substance that did not exist in its current form until the 9th century CE. The mismatch between the hardware your brain inherited and the software your culture provides is an ancient calibration meeting, a product it was never built for. What is remarkable is not that humans struggle with that mismatch. What is remarkable is what they built while navigating it. The limestone pillars at Göbekli Tepe, the bone flutes at Jayahu. The hymn to Ninkasi, one of the oldest written texts in Sumerian history, which contains, embedded inside its religious verses, a complete recipe for brewing beer. The people who composed that hymn were not celebrating excess, they were documenting something they considered sacred, a technology so central to their survival and their community that it required a goddess to hold it. Across every culture, on every continent where fermentation was possible, humans arrived at the same behavior independently: gather, ferment something, drink it together, and make meaning from the experience. They disagreed on almost everything else: language, gods, borders, the afterlife. But they agreed on that ritual without coordinating, without a shared origin point. The Arabic word alcohol meant the most refined thing, the essential substance, distilled beyond impurity. The scholar who coined it was describing ethanol as a chemical phenomenon, something so powerful it seemed impossible that it had been hiding inside ordinary rotting fruit all along. He was right to be astonished. 10 million years of evolution, one amino acid, 9,000 years of deliberate brewing, a word borrowed from a man who never drank it. And here we are, still gathering, still fermenting, still trying to name what this thing actually is and what it has made of us. The answer may be simpler than we expect. It did not interrupt human history. It is woven through the middle of it, and the question was never really why we drink. The question is what we were reaching for when we started and whether we have found it yet.